Hi, Assassins. I'm Brooke.
And I'm Cami.
Welcome to Bookish Realms.
We're just two girls who can't stop talking about fantasy books.
After deep diving into Crown of Midnight with you all, we're diving into the broader world of SJM's universe, the Maasverse. If you're like us, you can't help but notice the little hints, parallels, and Easter eggs that connect the story to ACOTAR and Crescent City. Today, we'll be looking at these connections just for Crown of Midnight, the second book in the series. Because, let's be honest, we'd be here for 10 hours if we covered the entire series at once. So, we'll be releasing one of these episodes after each book deep dive.
We'll be talking about what's obviously connected, what's subtly hinted at, and where we think all these threads might lead next. Get ready for some wild theories and, of course, a little speculation because you just never know with SJM. Also, go listen to our What is the Maasverse episode, which gives you a quick overview of what the Maasverse even is.
Before we continue, we want to give a huge spoiler warning for all of the Maasverse. There will be spoilers for all three series in this episode, including the most recent book in the Crescent City series, House of Flame and Shadow.
Let's kick things off by diving into the biggest links that connect Throne of Glass, ACOTAR, and Crescent City. These are the major links and plot points that pretty much scream Maasverse. In this section, we'll only cover things that are confirmed.
From learning more about the word to opening portals to other realms to being followed around by a certain pesky book, let's get into what we consider the major links in this book. Let's start with the word, which we learn a lot more about in this book. Baba Yellowlegs, who we'll revisit in our minor link section, gives us huge information download about the word and the word gates. Quote, "The word governs and forms the foundation of this world, not just Aurelia, but all life. There are worlds that exist beyond your knowledge, worlds that lie on top of each other and don't know it. Right now, you can be standing on the bottom of someone else's ocean. The word keeps these realms apart." This basically opens up the Maasverse and gives us a framework to work in. The word governs and forms the foundation of the world. It both gives and governs life. Worlds exist on top of each other, being kept apart by the word.
In A Court of Silver Flames, Meryl's earlier research focused on this exact topic. Quote, "When she first came here, she was obsessed with theories regarding the existence of different realms, different worlds, living on top of each other without even knowing it. Whether there is merely one existence, our existence, or if it might be possible for worlds to overlap, occupying the same space, but separated by time and a whole bunch of other things I can't even begin to explain to you because I barely understand them myself." Nesta's brows rose. Really? And then Gwyn answers, "Some philosophers believe there are 11 worlds like that, and some believe there are as many as 26, the last one being time itself. While this exact concept isn't mentioned verbatim in Crescent City, Bryce literally world walks and proves that there are different realms. In House of Flame and Shadow, the word is brought up again. Quote, "And she," the Underking went on, gesturing to that unusual depiction of Urd towering above him, "was not a goddess, but a force that governed worlds, a cauldron of life, brimming with the language of creation. Urd, they call her here, a bastardized version of her true name, Word, we call her in that old world." This tells us that the word from Throne of Glass and Urd from Crescent City are the same force. The Underking also confirms that the Shifters, as they're known in Crescent City, come from the other world where Urd exists as the word.
While we can't confirm this, the description of word/Urd is very similar to the mother in ACOTAR. The mother spilled the contents of the cauldron and created Prithian. Along with the word, we get more information about the word gates. Quote, "There are gates, black areas in the word that allow for life to pass between the worlds. There are word gates that led to Aurelia. All sorts of beings have come through them over the eons. Benign things, but also the dead, and foul things that crept in when the gods are looking elsewhere. Word gates are described as black areas in the word, which is in line with most of the depictions we've seen of different characters world walking or opening portals. And Baba confirms for us that things have come through the gate. We've learned that Maeve and Erewhon both came through a gate in Throne of Glass. In Crescent City, Thea and Bryce, along with a few other characters, are confirmed to be able to world walk, though the way in which they do it does not directly reference a word gate.
But Bryce's use of the horn and her starborn power to open a gate is similar to how word keys and word marks are used in Throne of Glass. At the end of House of Earth and Blood, Bryce accidentally uses Luna's horn and triggers the 7 gates in Crescent City to open, allowing all sorts of creatures to come through, some of which Bryce refers to as demons. In this book, Selena opens a portal to see Nehemia, but she accidentally smears a word mark as she fights off Archer. This changes the portal and it opens to a different realm. What comes through is described by Kale, Selena, and Dorian as a demon. We compare the physical description of this demon to some of the demons Bryce encounters in Crescent City, and they're very, very, very similar. Fish-like teeth, milky eyes, and freaky long fingers that are tipped with claws. In both the Crescent City world and in the Throne of Glass world, opening portals can have devastating consequences. It's obvious that the realms surrounding these two realms are filled with monsters and demons and freaky creatures who are eager to break through when the gates are open. It's very interesting that the only series where we don't see characters opening portals and crossing into different realms is ACOTAR, unless you count the Void, which Farah and Reese both enter when they die.
The final piece of this word puzzle is word marks, which are ancient symbols that can be used for a bunch of different things: to open doors, close doors, to torture people, to summon demons. In Throne of Glass, Selena is introduced to word marks by Nehemia, who has knowledge of the word marks because the skill was passed down in her family. Before she dies, Nehemia begins sharing her knowledge of word marks with Selena. Along with that, Selena uses the Walking Dead, which appeared to her back in Throne of Glass, to learn more word marks. Selena tells us that the title like this has been burned with the rest of the books on magic, and The Walking Dead seems to be sentient in some way. It seems to always pop up whenever Selena needs it. The Walking Dead makes a guest appearance in the Crescent City universe. When we first read House of Earth and Blood, we were both shook when we read that Jessica's library contained The Walking Dead. Not just that, but she also has the Book of Breathings, which Feyre threw into the void created by the cauldron at the end of ACOWAR. This Maasverse connection is further solidified when we learn that Jessica's books, yeah, they're from the Library of Parthos. That leaves us with the same question we had at the end of our Throne of Glass Maasverse Connections episodes. Is The Walking Dead from the Library of Parthos, or does it predate it?
Our last major link comes from chapter 50 of Crown of Midnight. Selena is fighting off the demon creature, and she needs to keep it contained and keep other creatures from coming through. This is her first time shifting in 10 years, and she's having a hard time controlling her magic. So she finds a solution. Quote, she had little control over the power, but she did have a sword, a sacred sword made by the Fae, capable of withstanding magic, a conduit. Not giving herself time to think it through, she threw all her raw power into the golden sword. Its blade glowed red hot, its edges crackling with lightning. While Bryce is not a sword, her powers work similarly to how this moment is described. In House of Sky and Breath, Bryce figures out that she can combine her powers with others, mainly Hunt, Azrael, and Hypaxia. This essentially allows her to charge up and access powers like winnowing or teleporting, essentially. Bryce herself is a conduit of sorts, similar to how Selena charges up Damaris here. It's also super interesting that the sword flows red, but crackles with lightning, as Selena's power is not lightning, it's fire. This connection in the Maasverse, especially with conduits and magical objects, is so interesting when you look at how it plays out across different books.
An example of this is in House of Sky and Breath, where we see a scene with Hunt and Bryce that mirrors something Selena does in Throne of Glass. So, in House of Sky and Breath, Bryce is standing beside Hunt when he unleashes a storm of power. The lightning wreathed around him creates this insane energy. Here's how it's described. Wreathed in lightning from wingtip to toe, Hunt landed beside Bryce so hard the earth shuddered. The power rolling off of him sent Bryce's hair floating upwards. Primal rage poured from Hunt as he faced down the shepherd, the Reapers. Bryce has seen power like this before, though, something carved into stone at the CCB, a fey male posed like an avenging god. Hunt, however, is even more intense. He's a storm in human form. And what does Bryce do? She steps in front of his lightning with the star sword drawn because she has a half-baked theory that she can absorb it and be a conduit for his power. Hunt's lightning strikes the star sword, which causes a crazy chain reaction. Hunt's lightning hits the star sword and the world erupted. The power cracked through Bryce and her body becomes a vessel for it. This is almost identical to Selena's experience with Damaris. Bryce, like Selena, uses an object, the star sword, to channel power, and it works, just like Selena with Damaris. In Bryce's case, the lightning power is transferred to her, though some of the power is still in the sword. The magic from the lightning is still crackling in her, much like how Selena can wield Damaris. The magic is held and transferred by these objects, and that seems to be a recurring theme in the Maasverse.
But here's where it gets deeper. In the ACOTAR series, the Star Sword wasn't just forged randomly. It was made by King Fion in the Cauldron, which is huge because it ties it back to Throne of Glass. We see Damaris act as a conduit of power too, just like the Star Sword. And it makes us wonder, is Damaris somehow a made object similar to how the Star Sword was crafted? Or Is this just a common trait in magical weapons, that they can become conduits like this? This Maasverse connection doesn't stop there either. In A Court of Silver Flames, there's a whole other layer with weapons and imbued power. Cassian and Nesta go to a blacksmith, and a few days later, the blacksmith comes back saying that the weapons that Nesta made are cursed. Turns out, Nesta somehow imbues the weapons with her magic. The text explains, quote, once the High Fae were more elemental, more given to reading the stars and crafting masterpieces of art and jewelry and weaponry. Their gifts were more raw, more connected to nature, and they could imbue objects with that power. We see similar elemental powers in Throne of Glass, like Aylin's fire, Rowan's wind, and Aylin, as we know, can imbue magic into objects herself, just like Nesta. And then Rhys shares one last connection that really ties all of this together. The last made sword, it was created 10,000 years ago. And guess what that sword was? Gwydion's sword, which is the Star Sword. It almost feels like all these objects, Damaris, the Star Sword, the weapons Nesta imbues with her power, are part of this like larger interconnected web in the Maasverse that like creates this like power that flows between weapons and people in ways that we're only beginning to understand.
Let's end our major connection section with the Valg. This word is first mentioned in the series in Crown of Midnight, and we get a huge info download on what the Valg are and how they came to be in Aurelia. Baba Yellowlegs tells us the Valg are demons that come to Aurelia through a word gate. We also learn that the Valg are the ones who created the 3 word keys by breaking off a piece of the word gate. By using the 3 word keys at once, the Valg were able to open the word gates as they wished. So, they opened it and let thousands of their soldiers into their world. According to the history lesson Baba gives us in Crown of Midnight, the Fae set out to stop this and were able to retrieve the word keys. With the help from Maeve, they were banished back to the realm. Maeve couldn't figure out how to put the keys back and fix the word gate, so she gave them to Bran and Galathinius for safekeeping. We covered this in our episode 7 deep dives, but this history is not 100% correct. Maeve did want the word keys for herself and attempted to steal them from Bran and Galathinius, killing his friend Athriel in the process. Mala Firebringer, the sun goddess, stepped in to help Brandon retrieve the word keys. He took them to Aurelia, hid them in 3 places, and wrote the poem about their location. Baba, as ancient as she is, still believes this version of history, which shows us just how deep Maeve's deception went.
This concept, though, of parasitic, demon-like beings traveling to other realms to try to conquer and use them is a constant thread in the Maasverse. Moore even says that he thinks that the King of Otterland would have tried his hand at conquering another realm or enslaved creatures to conquer the rest of ours if he had all 3 word keys. By the end of the Crescent City series, we learn that this is exactly what the Asteri do and have done for millennia. In House of Flame and Shadow, Amren reveals that the Asteri were known as the Daglin in Prythian, tying these parasitic freaks straight to ACOTAR too. While we can confirm that the Asteri and the Daglin are the same beings, we cannot with certainty say that the Valg are the same. So, what similarities can we confirm between the Asteri, the Daglin, and the Valg? 2 words, black blood. In Crown of Midnight, Dorian and Selena encounter a creature in the dungeons, which is a result of a Valg experiment or possession. We don't really know. When Selena beheads this creature, black blood sprays everywhere. We later learn that all Valg bleed black blood. So let's go back to House of Flame and Shadow, where Bryce, Azriel, and Nesta come across Vesperus' tomb. Vesperus was a member of the Asteri, or as they're known in Prythian, the Daglin. When Bryce kills Vesperus, her blood is described as dark blood, meaning that the Asteri/Daglin also bleed black blood, or dark blood, whatever. But that black blood connection goes even deeper in Prythian. The Weaver and Lanthus also both bleed black blood. We do not get a description of the Bone Carver's blood when he dies in Akawar, but he is the Weaver's brother along with Koschei, so we can assume that they all bleed black blood. What does this mean ultimately? Are the Valg also Asteri/Daglin? Are all the evil creatures in the Maasverse somehow spawned from this parasitic, demon-like force? We know that the Asteri and the Daglin are the same beings and they bleed black blood, and so do Valg. At the end of House of Flame and Shadow, the Asteri we know of have all been killed. In Kingdom of Ash, Erewhon and Maeve are killed, but Erewhon's brothers are still alive somewhere. Will Orcus and Mantix pop up in ACOTAR 6? Or maybe in the new series that SJM has teased and will very hopefully release soon because we're desperate.
Please give it to us, Sarah.
I started shaking like a chihuahua at the end there. I'm not sure why I had such a reaction to that.
You're just really ready for ACOTAR 6 and this other fucking series. Like, we've been waiting forever. You're like, give it to me. I'm going to go crazy.
That was scary. I felt like I was losing control of my body for a moment. Okay.
The Valve were trying to valve you up, girl. They were trying to go inside of you.
I would never let them. My shields are up.
Your shields are up. You got them brick by brick, no gaps in those bricks up there.
Yeah.
Period. We love it. All right, we've covered the big elements that connect Crown of Midnight to the Maasverse. Now let's talk about some of the smaller connections. For us, Baba herself is a thread that connects the Maasverse. Baba is a witch, yes, but she also presents herself as a fortune teller of sorts, an oracle. While at first her fortune-telling powers seem more like a bit for a carnival, she does actually seem to have some power to see into the future. As she mentions, the nameless is my price prophecy to Selena and Dorian, and makes other cryptic mentions that hint to us that she knows more than she's letting on. Regardless of whether Baba's powers are real or not, what is real is the concept of an oracle or of people who have the power of sight. Mort confirms that seers exist in Aurelia once upon a time. Quote, I'm afraid I can't be of service, Mort sniffed. If you want an instant answer, you should find yourself a seer or an oracle. Selena slowed her pace. You think if I read this to someone with the gift of clairvoyance, they might be able to see some different meaning that I'm missing? Perhaps, though as far as I know, when magic vanished, those with the gift of sight lost it too. This is what pushes Selena to go visit Baba, since she presented herself as an oracle. Why does this matter to us? So in ACOTAR, Elaine's powers is believed to be the power of sight. She's a seer. She can see into the future, though she has not explored this power enough for us to really grasp how it works. And we have oracles in Crescent City too. Quote, all Fae, male and female, made a visit to the city's oracle at age 13 as one of the two great rites to enter adulthood. First the oracle and then the ordeal, a few years or decades later. The oracle gives the Fae prophecies or predictions about their future. Bryce blinds the oracle, signaling her immense amount of starborn power. Rune's prophecy is that the bloodline will end with him, which comes true to some extent. Crescent City also has mystics, which are able to see all worlds. They are basically sold into slavery and are usually in a group of 3, a male, a female, and one that is both. We learn that the Asteri have a ton of mystics trapped underneath the Crystal Palace, allowing them to see into other worlds. So, Baba Yellowlegs becomes more than just a carnival act or a freaky witch. She ties the Throne of Glass series into this reoccurring theme of prophecy and the gift of sight, which we see in the other 2 Maasverse series. Oracles, seers, mystics, whatever you want to call them, they are all a smaller link that connects the Maasverse.
Now, let's talk parallels in the Maasverse. This is the section where we discuss phrases, descriptions, and connections that we can't 100% connect yet, but that we're pretty sure exist for some reason. For the parallel section, we'll break it down in 3 sections: lore, descriptions, and language. Our first lore parallel is iron. In Throne of Glass, iron can suppress magic, something that Aelin tragically finds out when Maeve captures her. Sorsha, the healer, also mixes up iron potions for Dorian to drink in an attempt to control his magic. This concept is carried into ACOTAR, but it's a little different there. At the beginning of the story, when Farah is out hunting, she thinks to herself that it's common knowledge that the Fae hate iron. Later, when Lucian reveals that the Fae can lie, Farah asks him if it's true that the Fae hate iron. Lucian says it doesn't do them a lick of harm, only Ashwood can hurt them. Lucian says the Fae had to give the humans some semblance of safety, and thus the idea of iron as a weapon against them was put forth, along with the idea that the Fae can't lie. But is that it really? Or does this lore in ACOTAR come from somewhere else? Maybe even Aurelia? Does it possibly come from a world walker who visited Aurelia and learned that the Fae there are weakened by iron? The way that the lore from Prythian that the humans know matches up with the reality in Aurelia is too coincidental.
There's also similar language around the gods in Throne of Glass and the gods in Prythian. When Selena is deep in her grief, she thinks, but there were no gods left to bargain with, no one to offer her soul to in exchange for another moment with Nehemia. This notion that the gods are gone or not listening comes up often early in the series, and essentially becomes true in Kingdom of Ash, when Aelin opens the Word Gate and lets them return to their world. Even more interesting is that Aelin opens another portal to let in demons from another realm as revenge for what the gods have put them all through. This idea comes up early in the ACOTAR series and seems to be established lore. Feyre comments that similarly to Aurelia, the humans have lost their gods. Quote, We mortals no longer kept gods to worship, but if I had known their lost names, I would have prayed to them, all of them. The humans don't remember the names of the Fae gods either. Later on, Feyre attributes this lack of the gods to the Fae leaving the human lands, and overall, this rings true even in Prythian. The only gods mentioned are the mother and the cauldron, if you can even count those as gods. The only other mentions of gods is when we're introduced to Koshte, Striga, and the Weaver, who are referenced to as old gods. This is a little different in Throne of Glass, where we do learn the names of several gods, like Loomis, Mala, and Hellas.
In Crescent City, the gods are actually frequently named and referenced. Bryce mentions that the lore around the gates in Crescent City is that the droplet of power given over to make them function as communication devices is an offering to the 5 gods. Out of all 3 Maasverse realms, the gods seem to be the most present in Crescent City. Now let's get into descriptions. Again, these are not things that we can connect yet, but the language is too similar for us not to break it down and analyze what it could possibly mean. Let's start with the descriptions of the passageways and dungeons beneath the castle's library. Celaena finds herself traveling deep underneath the castle, following a set of spiraling doors. Quote, rather, it was the doors, the dozens of iron doors that lined both of the sides of the hallway. All as nondescript as the door behind her, all revealing nothing of what might be behind them. At the opposite end of the hall, another iron door gleamed dully in the torchlight. What was this place? In episode 7 of our Crown of Midnight deep dives, we analyzed the spiral and all these doors. And I myself spiraled about all these doors. Celaena comes to the conclusion that these iron doors are a sort of prison for creatures like the Valg experiment that her and Dorian run into. This is very similar to the prison in ACOTAR, where terrifying creatures and the criminals of Prythian are kept underneath a mountain. In House of Flame and Shadow, this is actually revealed to be part of the Dusk Court. The parallels don't stop there, though. The library in ACOTAR, where Nesta spends a lot of her time during A Court of Silver Flames, has a similar description. The library in ACOTAR also has levels and goes deep underneath. Bryaxis lives at the pit of the library, making it so that both Tog and ACOTAR have scary creatures hiding in their libraries.
Let's touch back on that spiral that Celaena finds herself traveling down, though. There are doors at each level of the spiral, and when she reaches the end, she realizes there are a total of 8 doors. 8 is a reoccurring number in the Maasverse. We know there are 8 gargoyles surrounding the clock tower, who Elena refers to as guardians. In Crescent City, there's the 8-pointed star, which is a starborn symbol. In ACOTAR, Nesta finds the harp sitting in the middle of the 8-pointed star, and her bargain tattoo with Cassian is an 8-pointed star as well. When you count the Dusk Court, there are 8 courts total. Counting Vesperus from House of Flame and Shadow, we are at 8 Aseri. There's also mentions of the number 8 too. That's when Celaena is orphaned, Feyre loses her mom, and Azriel is burned. We don't know what it means that there were 8 doors in the spiral underneath the library, but we're always keeping an eye out for when certain numbers appear.
There's one more interesting parallel with the library, though. The door to enter these dungeons is behind a tapestry. Here's a description of that tapestry. Quote, this tapestry, woven from red thread so dark it looked black, depicted nothing. She touched the ancient strands, marveling at the hue, so deep that it seemed to swallow her fingers in its darkness. The hair on the back of her neck rose, and Celaena put a hand on her dagger as she pulled the tapestry aside. This tapestry is so dark, it seemed to swallow her fingers when she touched it. In A Court of Frost and Starlight, Feyre finds a tapestry made of very similar material in the weaver's shop. Quote, the tapestry had been woven from fabric so black it seemed to devour the light, so black it almost strained the eye. The insignia, however, had been rendered in silver thread. No, not silver, a sort of iridescent thread that shifted with sparks of color, like woven starlight. The weaver waved off my apology. It's an unusual fabric. Questions are expected. She smoothed a hand over the wooden frame of her loom. I call it the void. It absorbs the light, creates a complete lack of color. You made it? Elaine asked, now staring over her shoulder toward the tapestry. A solemn nod. A newer experiment of mine, to see how darkness might be made, woven, to see if I could take it farther, deeper than any weaver has before. Having been in a void myself, the fabric she'd woven came unnervingly close. Why? Her gray eyes shifted toward me again. My husband didn't return from the war. The frank, open words clanged through me. It was an effort to hold her gaze as she continued. I began trying to create the void the day after I learned that he'd fallen. I had like a visceral reaction to this when we were reading it. Both of these tapestries seemed to swallow the light around them. Both tapestries get a reaction from Selena and Farah as the fabric is like a black void. They both react to it, like in a very similar way. However, Selena does not mention that the tapestry in the library has an insignia in silver, which is why we had to put this in the parallel section. We can't confirm that these are the same tapestries, but it is so creepy that they seem to be made from the same or very similar materials.
And now, let's get into the second portal that Selena opens when she accidentally smudges the word mark. Where it opens to seems familiar. We get our first description of this world from Kale. Quote, "The world that showed through the arch, depicting a land of mist and rock." Dorian also described this as a land of rock. And finally, as they get the portal to close, Selena also describes it in this way. Quote, "The mists and the rock and the ravine fading into black." This description is very similar to how Avalon and Crescent City is described. Avalon is described as a mist-shrouded isle. We later learned that even the magic that guards Avalon is so old that not even the Asteri can enter without permission. It's a land filled with ancient power. In House of Flame and Shadow, Vespers revealed that mists often signal a, quote, thin place, a location where the veil between worlds is thinner, making it easier to travel between them. Every world, she suggests, has at least one of these thin places. In Prithian, these misty thin places can be found in places like the Dust Court and the prison. In Crescent City, Bryce pinpoints several areas that are covered in mist, the Bone Quarter, the Northern Rift, and Avalon. With this context in mind, it becomes so interesting that the portal Selena opens is filled with mists. If mists are a marker of a thin place, could this world be connected to the other thin places we've explored in the Maasverse? Or is it just a random portal? We'll definitely revisit this idea later, especially in Airfire, when we're introduced to Mistward.
This isn't the only Throne of Glass and Crescent City parallel description, though. When Selena opens the portal to speak to Nehemia, she gets a very serious warning from Nehemia. Nehemia tells Selena, quote, "No one has the right to open the door to this realm, no matter how fierce their grief." Gavin gives Dorian a similar warning, quote, "Because a line that should never be crossed is about to be breached. It puts this entire castle in jeopardy and the life of your friend." Gavin and Nehemia, who are both dead, echo the idea that the realm of the dead is off limits. No one has the right to go there. It's a line that shouldn't be crossed. In Crescent City, we see the Underking use very similar language to describe the Bone Quarter, which is where the spirits of the dead reside until they pass through the Dead Gate. We later learned that the Bone Quarter was just another way for the Asteri to collect Second Light, which is what First Light is called when it comes from the dead. While the Bone Quarter might be a fabricated realm of the dead, the description parallels still exist. When Bryce visits the Bone Quarter in House of Earth and Blood to trade her spot there to ensure Danica's spot, the Underking says, quote, "It has been an age since a mortal dared set foot on my isle," which parallels that idea of the realm of the dead being off limits, just like in Crown of Midnight. Later, when Bryce visits the Bone Quarter in House of Sky and Breath again, the Underking tells her she is not entitled to speak to the dead. In this instance, this is because Bryce gave up her place in the Bone Quarter. But still, the idea that people are not entitled to speak to the dead persists. The Underking also says that no one can enter this land without his knowledge, making it seem like this realm is heavily secured and again, a place for the dead and no one else. All of these warnings across Throne of Glass and Crescent City reinforce the idea that the realm of the dead is a sacred, untouchable space, one that mortals are not meant to access no matter their grief, their power, or their desperation. And finally, the most shiver-inducing description parallel we've come across so far. Before we continue, let's clarify some geography stuff. As far as we understand, Wendland is a country/kingdom, and Doranel is a city within that kingdom, since it's described to as the City of Rivers. As Selena sails off to Wendland, she describes it as a land of myths and monsters, a kingdom of dreams and nightmares made flesh. This made both of us pause and stare at the wall for 5 minutes. A kingdom of dreams and nightmares. Like the court of dreams and the court of nightmares. This is not helping the Reese's Valak theories because we know that Maeve resides in Doranel, which is a city in Wendland, like we just mentioned. Is this a subtle way for SJM to link Wendland and Maeve to the Night Court? We know that Valaris is referred to as the Court of Dreams and the Hewn City is referred to as the Court of Nightmares, aka just like this description of Wendland. A kingdom of dreams and nightmares. Crown of Midnight was released in 2013, and A Court of Mist and Fury, which is when we're properly introduced to the Night Court, was released in 2016. So it is possible that this line inspired SJM when creating different descriptions of the courts. Regardless, we are so unsettled by this. We'll definitely keep an eye on parallel descriptions when we begin our Heir of Fire deep dives, since we'll be fully entrenched in Wendlin, which also is known as the Kingdom of Dreams and Nightmares.
That shit is
I hate it. I hate it and I love it. I hate it and I love it.
I know. I can't wait until we do our episode on what good and bad in the Maasverse means. I think that's going to be so fucking fun. Or the line between good and bad. We're going to have so much shit to say. Okay, let's talk about the parallels in language between the three series. The word devour has straight up haunted us in this book. We've command found devour in about every single one of the fucking Maasverse books. We are actually going to start tracking it moving forward because it pops up a lot in the Maasverse, and it's usually in a very, very specific way. The first time the use of devour stood out to us is when Mort says, quote, Cain and the Ritterak were just the beginning of the threat to Aurelia. There is far deadlier power poised to devour the world. He's trying to push Elena into looking into the king's power, which we end up finding out comes from his use of the word keys and the Valg inside of him. And we start seeing that word get used a lot when referring to the king and the Valg powers. Quote, the black ring on the king's hand glinted in the dim light from the beastly fireplace, that mouth-shaped hearth that seemed poised to devour the room. The whole idea of the Valg power devouring or consuming something really rings true. Being Valg possessed eats away at your soul, your essence as a human. And when there's fights against the Valg later in the series, we get this imagery of them absorbing a person's power with their dark, shadowy magic. Later, when Aelin is in the passageways underneath the clock tower, she uses devour to describe what touching the wordstone feels like. Quote, she touched the stone and a shock went through her head pounding so badly she gagged. The eye of Elena gave a pulse of blue light but quickly died, as if the light itself had been sucked toward the stone and devoured. The wordstone sucks up light. It eats it up, devouring the fucking power. Crazy.
So why do we care that devour pops up time and time again in connection to the wordstone and the Valg? Because the word devour is used in the Maasverse to describe the powers of several other beings. Rhysand, the Cauldron, Apollyon, and the Void. When Farah describes Rhys's power, she uses the word devour. Quote, in the distance, rushing toward me, toward Valaris, a mighty darkness devoured the world. Soldiers in its path did not emerge again. My mate, death incarnate, night triumphant. I can't. Okay, we must continue. And then the Cauldron is described in the same way by both Farah and Nesta. Quote, in the center of the massive tent, a darkness that devoured the light, the Cauldron. Then later, when Nesta thinks of being in the Cauldron, she says, quote, some days when she'd climbed into the icy water, not feeling its bite, but that of the Cauldron's dark depths as it devoured her whole, as it ripped apart her humanity, her mortality, and made her into this. This use of the word devour gets even more interesting when we get into Crescent City. It's funny because I think this is when we first started to make this connection about the word devour, because we also had almost convinced ourselves that the Asteri were the ones being used as devouring power, but it's not. It's actually one of the princes of hell and Hunt's daddy, Apollyon. Quote, why do you think I slew Peleus? Why do you think I went on to devour Sirius? This comes up a few other times when how Apollyon essentially ate Sirius is described. He literally ate her. The word devour is always used to describe how Apollyon killed Sirius. And it's also used to describe his power itself. Quote, Apollyon stepped forward, a hand raised. Pure devouring darkness destroyed Polaris's light. That's the part that starts to give both of us shivers. The Valg power, Rhys's power, and then the power of the Prince of the Pit himself are all described using this word, devour.
What's the last thing described using the word devour? The Asteri describe the power in the void. Here's the first quote. Then darkness like none you have ever seen shall devour this planet, and you will all cease to exist, said the Asteri to Rigelus' right, Hesperus, the evening star. And then again, as Bryce threatens to destroy the core that the Asteri made as the kill switch for Midgard. Here's the quote. Think very carefully, Bryce Quinlan, Rigelus said, stepping forward with his hands raised. One bullet from you into this core and this world and all its innocence will be sucked into a void with no end. The same void that Apollyon had claimed allowed him to devour the Asteri. Polaris is that how you say it? Polaris. Polaris, interesting. Polaris's body has been sucked into nothing. If what we learn about the word in Throne of Glass is true, this void could be the black areas in the word, which is what allows the word gates to open. In these three worlds, devour becomes synonymous with consuming light, life, and humanity itself, and it's used to describe really significant people, objects, and powers. We won't get fully into it here, but Truth Teller and the Star Sword are both described as devouring the light around them several times. In short, devour feels like so much more than just a word. It feels like a warning about a certain kind of destructive power in the Maasverse. For us, tracking this word through the Maasverse has opened up questions about the true nature of power, darkness, and fate. What does it mean to have the power to devour? What implications does it have for characters like Rhys or Apollyon? So, we'll be keeping an eye on every instance of devour as we continue exploring these stories.
Let's switch to a lighter parallel because the devour word is a really heavy topic for both Brooke and I.
Yes.
It's something that actually haunts us and that we talk about a lot in our crazy spiral conversations. So, music. As Selena listens to Rena Goldsmith's song, she says, quote, not a single soul stirred in the hall. Even the servants remained along the walls and in doorways and alcoves. Rena paused between songs only long enough to allow a heartbeat of applause before the harp and the violin began anew, and she hypnotized them all once more. That whole idea of being hypnotized by music is exactly what happens to Farah when she drinks the fairy wine and listens to Tamlin play the fiddle. Quote, I wanted to be in the music, wanted to ride its speed and weave between its notes. I could feel the music around me like a living, breathing thing of wonder and joy and beauty. And it also happens to Nesta when she's listening to the priestess sing, and that is what allows her to discover the location of the harp, which is interesting since Rena Goldsmith is also playing a harp. It just seems like all of our FMCs have this deep connection to music and it guides them to different things. When we get into Air of Fire, Selena becomes hypnotized by music and is unable to control her power because of the effect that music is having on her. And our last language parallel is connected to Selena's dream with the Lord of the North, which includes a chasm, an abyss, and a ravine. This is a small language parallel that we touched on, but these are also titles of different sections of the Crescent City series, which are tied into the drop and the Princess of the Pit. We're not far enough in the series to include all of that in this Maasverse Connections episode, but we do have a lot of theories about why this language is similar, and we'll definitely revisit it when we get to Kingdom of Ash. Because I'm convinced that Aelin does the fucking drop in Kingdom of Ash. I'm so fucking convinced. I'm so convinced. I have a whole fucking Google Doc on it after I wrote this section about the fucking ravine and the chasm and the fucking shit. She totally fucking does the drop. Whatever. I'm done.
I don't think I've ever heard you curse that much in one sentence ever in my life. So I can tell that you feel very strongly about this.
I am convinced, and I will explore it in other Maasverse episodes. We're not far enough yet because we're not in Kingdom of Ash when she does it, but
I could see that though, actually.
I have to take a deep breath.
And now our absolute favorite section, theories and speculations. Let's get into some of our unhinged shit. Cami, kick us off, girl.
You guys already know where I'm going to start. It's my theory, my brainchild, that Elena is Starborn. I started this theory during our Throne of Glass Maasverse Connections episode, where I started noticing that a lot of the descriptions of Elena match up with descriptions of Starborn power. For example, in Throne of Glass, the book, Elena's power is always described as gleaming golden light, and she herself is even described as a shooting star plummeting to Aurelia. If you want to listen to those connections, you can go listen to that Maasverse Connections episode for Throne of Glass, but I'll try to just stick to the Crown of Midnight ones. In Crown of Midnight, there's a few more moments with Elena that add to my Starborn theory, but the main one is tied to the Eye of Elena. Dorian describes the Eye of Elena shining like a tiny blue star. Again, this is just such a tiny detail, And I know I sound crazy, and it's because I am. But to me, that description is literally identical to how Bryce describes holding the star out of herself in Crescent City. She holds it in her hand, and it's like a blue star. I'm convinced that Elena is Starborn. I actually think a lot of them are, but I'm not gonna get into it right now. Here's my crazier theory. We've all seen it. Reese's Valg, maybe, all these things. I'm not so much focused on that. I'm convinced, though, that Daemati power, aka mind reading power, is tied to the Valg. And it's not even because later we learn that Maeve herself has Daemati power. It is mostly because of this Valg creature that Dorian and Selena encounter in the clock tower passageways. The way that that creature like claws at its head really stuck with me because it's almost like it's like fighting off something that's like inside. And we know that like Valg possessions like make you forget like who you are. I feel like something inside of his head is making him forget like who or what he is. And we never really see Rhysand's power be described in that way as something that like hurts or like is inside your head. But we do know that he could shatter minds if he wanted to, just like Maeve. And like we've said a million times, like we don't think that Rhys being Valg immediately makes him evil. I think SJM does a great job of exploring the nature of evil and like opens us up to conversations about how evil is created and how something evil can be turned good. So even if Rhys's Daemati powers are somehow connected to the Valg, I don't think it's like an immediate signal that it's something bad, you know? And my final theory has to do with Rena Goldsmith's song. In this song, she describes, quote, "This song was an ancient legend, the story of a fey woman blessed with a profound power, sought by kings and lords across every kingdom. Though they used her to win wars and feared her, none truly saw her. One day, a knight came, seeking her power for his king. But as they traveled, his fear turned to love. He saw her for who she was, not what she was. And all of the kings who courted her with promises of glory, it was the knight's gift of understanding her soul that won her heart." To me, like when I read this, it just sounds so much like the story of Thea and Adis from Crescent City, / I guess ACOTAR, because Thea is originally from Prythian. Thea served the Asteri much like the Fey woman in this song served kings and lords. Despite her power, she was isolated and lonely. When she rebelled with Phaon, she was betrayed by him when he eventually like wouldn't leave her the throne, which mirrors that like theme of betrayal in Rena Goldsmith's song. And that is why like Thea kills him. But I also think that the knight mentioned in Rena Goldsmith's song could be Adis, not Phaon. Adis was the one who truly saw Thea for who she was, and their bond wasn't about her power, but it was about understanding and love. I mean, like they were literally mates. The parallels between Rena Goldsmith's ancient song and Thea's story just seem too strong to be a coincidence, at least for me. I really do think there's some sort of like legend connection there.
I could see that. I could see that for sure. Okay. So I have two theories that I want to add to my list of crazy shit. My first one is that I think that when people die in these worlds, they reincarnate into some other form in another realm. It's almost as if like their soul shifts and adapts to like the new laws of the world that they enter. And the one that really made me think about this was when Dorian is awoken by Gavin, and in the moment is really vivid for Dorian. It goes, quote, "Prince," the man said, his golden crown gleaming. There was something feral in his eyes, as if the king was more accustomed to roaming the wilderness than walking these marble halls. "You must awaken." That description gives me like a little bit of chills because Gavin is a human male when he's on Aurelia, right? But in this moment, he's described as having animalistic features and wild, untamed eyes. And it feels like he's not entirely human anymore, like as he was when he was on Aurelia. And it, like, I believe it's because like when he dies, he doesn't cease to exist. He transformed, taking on a Fae-like form in another realm. And honestly, I think like this pattern kind of repeats itself with many of the characters when they die. Like their essence intelligence doesn't disappear. It just kind of evolves. And this, like, you can kind of see this with like Bryce and Aelin almost a little bit. Like their physical descriptions aren't the same, but like if you think about the way that their character traits are, like they are very, very similar. And you could also kind of say the same for Nesta. Like I think all three of them are very familiar, like are very similar, or Feyre, kind of. Actually, Nesta's kind of her own, but you get what I'm trying to say. But anyways,
Yeah.
Now let's talk about something else. The libraries are something so interesting to me in this series, in the 3 series, and it like has been since the first time that I ever read these books. But I think that the ACOTAR library and Throne of Glass library, I truly think that these libraries serve as portals to hell, like, or to hell realms, or are meant to mimic the concept of hell itself. So if you think about Dante's Inferno for a second, it describes hell as 9 circles, each one spiraling downward, becoming smaller and darker until you reach the very bottom, where the worst of the worst are trapped. And this parallels how both the library and ACOTAR and the second catacombs of Throne of Glass are described. They're both presented as spiraled structures that descend into different levels. And what do we find at the bottom of each of them? Absolute nightmares.
Okay.
In ACOTAR, at the lowest point of the library, we encounter Bryaxis, a creature so ancient and terrifying it defies explanation. And similarly, in Throne of Glass, Lena stumbles upon a horrifying entity like lurking at the bottom of the catacombs. And these creatures kind of feel like a manifestation of pure chaos and evil, almost as if they're prisoners trapped at the core of these spirals, just like Dante's visions of hell. So I think it'll be really interesting to see, like, as they... And also there's the library that's in Tower of Dawn too, which has the other section on the bottom. So I think that's really interesting. And I'm interested to see, like, if Crescent City, because I know there's supposed to be a 4th Crescent City. I'm interested to see if there will be another library that describes that kind of like spiral, because I don't think the Great Library of Parthos or the Library of Parthos is described in that manner.
I would love for Crescent City 4 to have a Throne of Glass crossover, just because in general, I would love an actual crossover, but also because I need to see Aelin handle a gun.
I think that would be so funny.
And that's our deep dive into the Maasverse connections in Crown of Midnight. We love tracking the Maasverse connections and speculating about what it could all mean.
Join us next week for #Throne Thursdays as we start our Assassin's Blade deep dives. Trust us, you're going to want to hear our reactions to all that goes down in that book.
Don't forget to follow us on Instagram and TikTok, where our handle is @BookishRealmsPod. Actually, TikTok might be banned by then, but if it's still around, you should follow us. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this episode, so drop us a comment or send us a message. Also, leave us a rating if you like what you heard. It really helps us out.
Until then, keep reading, Assassins. Bye!